Hey, happy you are here. It is our first Fifth Sunday, so we're going to be gathering for breakfast at the office this morning. But if you're in this space, we are in an 8-week conversation around spiritual practices. And I just want to spend a few minutes here talking about our next spiritual practice, which is silence. What is silence? Richard Foster says that silence is closing off our souls from sounds, whether noise, music, or words, so that we may better still the inner chatter and clatter of our noisy hearts and be increasingly attentive to God. So it's a little wordy here, but I love this, closing off our souls from sounds. And the goal of this is to be increasingly attentive to God, centering ourselves on God and being with God. Which is first a great reminder that all of the spiritual practices are helps, right? They aid in the abiding of our journey to Jesus, and which is our end goal. And really, the practice of silence is important. One, of course, because we live in a city of noise. We live in a time of constant noise. But then at the end of the day, we come to ourselves and we have an inner chatter. And I want to talk about those things, but maybe more importantly, before I do that, I want to look at the biblical precedents for the practice of silence. There's a story in the Bible, in the book of 1 Kings, where Elijah goes and sleeps in a cave, and a word comes to him to go and stand before God on the mountain, and God is going to come and speak to him. And 1 Kings 19 says this: "Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper." And God was in the gentle whisper. God was in the quiet and in the stillness. And it's very important to understand the context here. Elijah's life is one of high highs and low lows. He, in chapter 18, had just confronted the prophets of Baal, and he had found amazing success, partnered with God to defeat the prophets of Baal. And it was a moment of high. God was with him. And then you turn to chapter 19, and Elijah faces low lows. He has to flee for his life, and he finds himself in a very depressed mental state, low lows. And I think this is a really important moment with this idea of meeting God in the silence, because there is something in us that's very genuine, longing to meet with God. And often I feel this even in myself, that I have a longing to meet with God in a great experience, right? I'm looking for God in a song or a worship experience, or I'm in a knowledge or in a word. And yet here we find God in the silence and in the gentle whisper. Isaiah has similar sentiments in Isaiah chapter 30. In verse 15 it says, "By waiting in calm you shall be saved. In quiet and trust lies your strength." And in our culture, we intuitively know that the noise drowns out the quiet. C.S. Lewis called it that the enemy's goal is to make our world a kingdom of noise. And we know that in our day in, day out lived experience. There's a great read from the New York Times from 2023 about noise pollution and its effects on the human body. This is, the article is, "Noise could take years off of your life. Here's how." And it talks about how noise enters your body through your ears, but then it's immediately relayed to the stress center of your brain, the amygdala. And it's the amygdala, as it's overactivated, it begins to have harmful effects on the body. So the endocrine system can overreact, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in, increases heart rate, can raise blood pressure. And one of the most fascinating things they did with this data is they showed that prior noise exposure primes the body to overreact, meaning we grow more and more sensitive to noise as we take it in, meaning we need to increase the level of silence in our life. The life of Jesus teaches us anything. He's modeling for us over and over and over again. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He sought out silence, often in the morning, sometimes in the evening. And if we could even escape the noise of our culture, then what we would face in the silence is the inner chatter. I've talked to a lot of people through this Lenten season. A spiritual discipline like fasting, when you do it, brings out our emotions. It brings out what's underneath the surface, and silence does the exact same thing. The things that we would rather not notice, the things that we would rather not feel, in silence begin to come up. Sadness, anger, loneliness, impatience. And so silence can actually be a very uncomfortable thing for us. There is still that desire, and I want to honor that. I think it's a really important tension that we live in. Psalm 46 says, "Be still and know that I'm God." We desire to be with God. Our hearts are longing for that. I know there's so many intentioned people in our community wanting to make room for God. And then we come into these spaces and our minds take over. And we start thinking, am I good enough? Do I have what it takes? Am I as good as them? Is my future secure? And that inner chatter comes up. And then oftentimes what we begin to feel is, I want to do this, but my mind is too distracted to do silence, right? Maybe a little shame or guilt begins to creep in there. Or we'd say, you know what, I have a desire to meet with God, and I did the contemplative practice, but nothing happened. Am I doing it wrong? There's a wonderful word that I want to give you today from, this is from a priest and professor at Villanova, Martin Laird, and he says this: "We have heard all sorts of talk about contemplation delivering inner peace, but when we turn within to seek this peace, we meet inner chaos instead of peace. But at this point, it is precisely the meeting of chaos that is salutary, not snorting lines of euphoric peace. The peace will indeed come, but it will be the fruit, not of pushing away distractions, but of meeting thoughts and feelings with stillness instead of commentary. This is a skill we must learn." Silence is actually something we have to work on and work through. And so it's something we do in repetition. If we feel like we're failing at it the first time, we have to keep pushing into it, seeking more of it. So I want to give you some fruits that come from the practice itself, and then I want to challenge you to practice some silence today. So the first fruit of the practice, this comes from Adele Calhoun. She says that, there's a list here, being attentive to Jesus, right? Primary goal. Having freedom from negative speech. And so thinking about how our words often get us into trouble, impulsiveness, gossip, etc. Receiving quiet from the chaos and noise of life. And so the stillness and silence actually is itself, in and of itself, a fruit. We find in silence a growing self-awareness where we're prone to filling awkward spaces and silences that we just actually learn about ourselves. And then what are we doing in the practice is we're learning to listen to other people at the same time. So let me give you a challenge here today to really practice this and to really push into it. And the first is, there's some steps here. Find a quiet space. It doesn't matter if it's indoor, outdoor. Maybe the natural sounds of nature could actually benefit you in this practice. If you are new to the practice, I would highly recommend not having your phone, but having a timer with you of some sort. And I want to challenge you today. I know this might sound like a huge step for some of you. I want to challenge you to 30 minutes of silence today. 30 minutes. You could break that into chunks and say, I'm going to do 3 sets of 10 minutes. You could do 2 of 15, but 30 minutes total of silence. And then here's how you would begin to do that. You'd find the quiet space, you'd put your phone or whatever away, and then choose a passage of scripture. You could choose Psalm 23, Philippians 4, Psalm 46, 1 John chapter 4. Read the passage, start the timer, read the passage, and then do nothing, right? I like to keep a piece of paper close to me when I'm doing any contemplative practice, because I do have a wandering mind and wandering brain. And so if a thought, a to-do, or something comes into my mind, I take the pen and paper, I write the thing that I need to do down, and then I go back to the practice and I say, I'm going to deal with that later. That's not a now thing, that's a later thing. I want to let that go. And if you do find yourself, your mind wandering off, or you're not really silent anymore, read the passage again and return to the stillness of the moment. And silence is the end goal. Let's not forget, right? Let's not be mad at ourselves when we feel like we're falling short, but actually let's realize the goal is abiding in the person of Jesus, tuning to the voice of Jesus, and doing nothing. And doing nothing really does do wonders for our soul. So let me leave you with this quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He says, To be silent does not mean to be inactive. Rather, it means to breathe in the will of God and to listen attentively and be ready to obey. Let's go and do likewise.